Hello, everyone, and welcome to the August edition of Reengineering Pride. Today, we'll be talking about education. As the school year is about to start again, we thought it would be a good opportunity to talk through some of the challenges that the LGBTQ plus community face within the realm of STEM education. We have quite a few speakers today from various different backgrounds. We have Dr. Clara Barker, a Daphne Jackson Trust Fellow at the University of Oxford. Avery Cunningham, who's an EDI business partner at Birmingham City University, Kat Collier, who's an education coordinator here at Equal Engineers, but spent 11 years as a physics teacher, and David Murray-Whittam, a senior building surveyor at WSP, who spent 18 years in education, working as a head of faculty for technologies. Clara, would you like to introduce yourself in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Clara Barker. I'm a material scientist, but my first degree was an engineering degree in Manchester. And yeah, I look into various thin film materials. I play with plasmas, which is really good fun. Basically, just playing like snooker with atoms on a day-to-day basis and treating them like Lego bricks. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, and I'm also on various things. I'm the Equality and Diversity Dean at Linacre College, and I'm on the Royal Society's Equality and Diversity Committee. And also the Inclusion and Diversity Representative Council for the Institute of Physics. Whilst my fellowship is sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry, basically I'll go anywhere that'll have me. I just get around.
Thank you very much, Avery.
Yeah, so consider myself a bit of a recovering engineer at this point. So I did study nuclear engineering before my current roles. So previous to this, I was a widening participation officer getting students into engineering. Before now, where I am EDI business partner at Birmingham City, but one of the areas I support is the Faculty of Engineering. And the other thing I look after is LGBT stuff for BCU. So very well placed to still be here.
Absolutely.
Outside of that as well, I do a lot of volunteer work. So I'm the Director of International Relations and Strategy for OSTEM, chapter-based LGBT and STEM organisation. I used to be the Director of Student Memberships, have many years of working with students, especially universities. I also do lots of other things as well. For example, Vice Chair of the Institute of Materials Pride Network, Birmingham Pride Community Fund Trustee, all of these wonderful things.
Excellent, thank you very much. Kat?
Hi everyone. So I'm Kat Collier. I am very new here at Equal Engineers. I started a couple of months ago, being their education coordinator. Previously to that, I was a physics teacher. I was a physics teacher in Scotland for 11 years. After doing my physics degree at St Andrews and my PGDE at Edinburgh, and was fortunate enough to work in lots of different schools across the country, some private, some state. Did my probation year in Stornoway, where I got sent to, and then relocated eventually to Edinburgh, and that's where I am now.
Thank you very much. And David?
Good afternoon, everyone. I come from possibly a slightly more practical, hands-on background. I feel in very good company with all you very intelligent people. My first degree is in motor vehicle and transport studies, and then I did an additional degree in design and technology with qualified teacher status, which took me into secondary school teaching for 18 years. So I started as a newly qualified teacher and stayed at the same school for 18 years, worked up to head of department and latterly head of faculty. And I decided I was a little disillusioned with it, and I wanted a career change. So I did a master's degree in building surveying, and 3 years ago I started working with WSP as a building surveyor. I've had a promotion to senior. And that's kind of my potted history work-wise, I suppose.
Thanks very much for that. So starting off with lived experience, and this is a question open for anyone. Can you share your experience as an LGBTQ plus individual in the education system? Obviously, all of you are educators, but as a student and an educator, what challenges or barriers have you faced, or have you seen others from the LGBTQ plus community face in an academic setting? Should we start
I'm
with Kat?
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So my experience is a little bit different. So I have or had, I think it's hard to tell with blue hair, a fair amount of straight passing privilege. So when I was a teacher, there was never an assumption that I was LGBT. It was just that I was straight. Um, and most people who meet me know fairly quickly that that's not the case. I think blue hair is generally a a waving flag of bisexuality in my experience. But for those who maybe aren't in the community, they wouldn't necessarily pick that up. So most of the experience I had as an educator was actually correcting people when they were assuming I was straight. I remember having conversations with staff who just assumed that I would follow the get married, have kids, that sort of routine, where that's not really what my path has ever been or was going to be. Um, Part of that was then confounded when I met my partner, who is male. And then you get the attitude of, well, you're dating a man, there's no way that you could be bisexual, or pansexual, as I tend to prefer. I usually end up using the word queer because it's one that just fits a little bit nicer with how I feel. Um, and so in terms of my experiences as an educator, it's been very eye-opening to see that staff have those preconceived ideas, and that someone who I consider myself fairly out, they just never even assumed, not for a second. It didn't even cross their mind. In terms of pupils were always a lot more understanding and a lot more open. So usually if I would ever tell anything about my life to pupils, they would ask, like, who was your partner? Or who is your partner? What's their name? They would keep it gender neutral,
Interesting.
until they knew one way or the other. Whereas my experience has been that that the staff have actually been less welcoming and less forthright, than the pupils were themselves. I'm quite,
And this is in secondary
I,
as well, in secondary education.
yeah, this is in secondary. Yeah, obviously there are some, the minority of pupils who, no matter who you are, they are going to find something to prod and poke at you about. Um, but my experience with the pupils as a whole was largely positive. I was very fortunate as well to be seen as sort of a safe adult for quite a lot of pupils. And I've had, while I was working in an all-girls school, I had some trans pupils come out to me, and that added a lot of complications to their schooling, being in a single-sex school but not identifying as female. And again, pupils were amazing. I was there when Isaac came out to his class, and the whole class applauded him. And then when I went to tell teacher that this had happened, they were like, "Oh, well, I wouldn't have allowed that." And it's like, well, why not? Because they're just expressing who they are. Um, so the negative things I've seen have definitely been from other members of staff, unfortunately, from the adults who should know better and are meant to be the educators.
That's really interesting. Is there anyone else who can relate to that?
Do you want me to? Oh, sorry, we were all talking at once now.
No,
That's
go
the
on.
same.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, my experience with the staff was to the contrary, really, in that when I started, you know, I was out straight away, and everybody knew in terms of the staff. There was never any homophobia or anything of any description. But having said that, I think I probably had a similar issue with regard to straight privilege, as Kat was saying. And I think, well, I know the pupils assumed that I was straight, and I never actually corrected them. And I do have regrets about that, because I think for straight students and LGBTQ plus students to see teachers who are out and proud, I think I could have made more of a difference to their lives, if that kind of makes sense. So that's one regret that I've got. But I more or less decided not to be out, because, and this kind of touches on what we're talking about anyway, I was a teacher of design and technology, more specifically resistant materials, which is basically woodwork, metalwork, and it tended to appeal to the naughtiest lads in the school, and I just didn't feel comfortable enough to be out with them, because I did feel as though I would be, not necessarily to my face, but possibly at break time and stuff like that, victimised. And, you know, the lads would ask me questions, oh, you're married, sir, you're married, sir? And I'd say no, because at the time I wasn't. Have you got a girlfriend, sir? And I would just say, well, that's really none of your business, is it? And the conversation ended there. So, whether they made assumptions from that, I don't know. But I didn't feel comfortable with the cohort that I was generally teaching to be out with them. But having said that, I was out with all the staff, and there were no issues at all. It was very, very supportive. A number of other gay teachers. So yeah, that, I mean, in a way, that's kind of contrary to what Kat said. But that maybe I had a particularly welcoming school. Maybe it's because I worked there for such a long time, you know, and I was absolutely clear when I started, well, it'll be 20 years ago now, that I was going to be out from the beginning, and people can kind of like it or lump it, but I never ever had any issues with the staff, and I don't think it hindered promotion prospects either. So positive in that regard, but I do have the regret that I could have done more for the kids, for all of the kids, if I was kind of out and proud and people knew.
Thanks for that, David. Clara, you were going to come in?
Yeah, I'm happy. No, Avery was also going to speak, but yeah, I came out as trans 10 years ago, and I basically was leaving academia. I'd worked in industry and things like that, and you know, I just hadn't seen any LGBT people in that time. I'd been working for 15, 20 years in engineering and science, and I'd met 2 out LGBT people. That was it. And I was working in labs around the world. And I decided, as a postdoc in Switzerland, I decided I was transitioning. I needed to. There was no question, I had to. And I figured that my career was just over when I did that. And so it was interesting. I sort of took the approach of, like, you know, career's over, so it don't matter. So I was quite free with what I was thinking. And I intended to move into a different field. Signed up to do a conversion course, a bit like David was talking about earlier. But I ended up doing the job interview here at Oxford just because, for different reasons, mostly because I was claiming unemployment benefit in Switzerland and I had to apply for jobs. And I came here and I was myself, and they didn't seem to care that I was trans. They were asking me questions about my skills, what I'm good at, what I can do, which is what you should have for an interview. But I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to have some awkward answers. And so I remember going on thinking, oh God, they're really nice. Like, if they offered me the job, I might have just, you know, I might have got this wrong. And sure enough, they did. I wasn't expecting them to. And I was a bit confused, and they thought that I was trying to, ask for more money. So they offered me more money, which was nice. That was an accidental thing. But yeah, it was unexpected. And so when I came here and I came out openly. I got in touch with people that I'd previously worked with. Most didn't care. Some did. There were some people who had offered me jobs and they were shut down. All of a sudden, they were busy. They were full. They didn't have any opportunities. They didn't have any collaborations. So some of that happened, but generally it was pretty good. And it's been really nice because, you know, I was leaving because I didn't see any LGBT people. And you know, the first time I did a talk as an LGBT scientist, I had a student come up to me saying I was about to quit because I didn't think I could be trans and a scientist. And now I've seen you, maybe I can. And I've had quite a few stories like that. There's a lot of ups and downs though. There's a lot of things. Oh, I love going into schools and doing science talks, and I love it because it's like we've got this scientist from Oxford, and then I turn up and they're like, "What the heck is this?" That's great. Love that. And you know, I always love it when that happens. But it is interesting that, you know, it's really changed over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, 9 years ago, I'd be invited to schools all the time. Less so these days because I think people are really nervous about the situation around trans people in the UK and schools. And I actually had a headmistress who'd seen me talk, invited me to speak at her school. And the what they called the trustees, the governors, they banned me from talking against her wishes because they were just so worried about legal ramifications. And I've seen more of that in the last few years. In universities, it's a bit of a battlefield. As someone that's quite visible, I haven't had any death threats in the last 12 months, but I certainly have when I've been visible. There's certainly a lot of pushback and there can be a lot of grief. So it's an interesting battle time right now. And, you know, with healthcare right now as well, it's just very, very difficult. One thing to note, especially with when it comes to engineering and science, we're international as well. And I've had students that I've worked with who it's illegal, possibly even punishable by death to be gay in their country or trans in their country. And so I have had students who were, I had one student came to me, they'd been caught in the background of a photograph in a gay club, just in the background, and their country put them on the terrorist watch list and rescinded their funding. And they were like, what can I do? And, you know, there's very little you can do. So there's good, but there's still issues. And especially when we're working internationally, we really have to think about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something we talked about on one of the other webinars we did was the international aspect that a lot of engineers do have to think about. I've worked for 3 global engineering companies, and there are countries that I would categorically never even visit on with work. Never mind, yeah, go to work in. And that brings on one of the other questions in this section was how have things changed over the years, and I expect the answer that we would get from, this is me assuming, but I would expect the answer we would get from a secondary school perspective from David and Kat would be positive change when it comes to non-trans issues. But obviously the political environment at the moment is not very welcoming. Avery?
Yeah, I can definitely echo that, and that was part of what I was going to come in with, is that definitely that kind of like fear around these things. Because I can bring some of those examples. For example, I got invited to be a guest speaker at my old secondary school to come talk about. I was selected because they were like, "You've done some great work since you left, and it'd be good to think." But there was such fear from the staff about it. Like they invited it, but they were really worried. And then every kid was absolutely fine. Similar to my old outreach job, staff were very worried. Apart from the academic who'd hired me, he didn't really have a clue what was happening. He was like, "No, we just hired the best person. What do you mean?" But there was a lot of fear that they were putting this trans person in front of all of these kids and being like, "Come do this thing." And literally none of those students cared or ever raised anything. They were very good. I'm always very surprised when I talk to people who are 16 and under, because they seem to have that level of fluidity and talking and comfortable thing that I didn't have at 16. And I am just over 10 years away from that kind of experience. I was instead doing those things secretly on Tumblr versus like out there with my friends. So it's just very different that they've moved it a little bit more on off the online spaces and sort of things. And there also just seems to be a lot less. When I was going through my undergraduate degree, when I started in 2015, so I guess that is coming up to 10 years. Wow, how time flies. I was doing a lot of self-advocacy for kind of transitioning. Like when I came out, my department were like, "Great, but what do we do? How do you come out? Who do you tell?" And I had to do a lot of that. Whereas now, when I seem to mentor, I somehow end up with a small army, I feel, of transgender undergraduates that I keep getting sent my way to kind of mentor through. And they seem to have to do a lot of less of that self-advocacy because there is policies in place, and they're asking me different questions to what I was asking. They're asking, but a lot of their things come from that fear. Like they're asking, will I be able to get a job? Will I be able to have a partner? Will I be able to have friends? They don't care about the career aspect like I was worried about. I was really, really worried about the career aspect of kind of coming out. It's funny that Clara mentions the stories because Clara, I remember being really excited the first time I ever met Clara because it was when I was also in a material science department and Clara was the first transgender material scientist, apart from myself, I'd met. And so I was super, super excited to meet. So the ones I do meet now do seem to have those role models and they don't need that as much. They're instead so overwhelmed by the fear of what is out there in the personal lives versus the professional things, at least from what I see.
So things have improved in some aspects, you're saying.
In
With-
some aspects, yes, like people are aware of these things, like it's a lot
Mhm.
less self-advocacy from that bit. And people are aware trans people exist, but that's also to
Yeah.
the detriment at that point
Sure,
as well, that
sure.
people are aware we exist, so they know that there should be processes and know these things exist, but they also know to be a lot worse about it. And I think the students coming through are not going to have the same issues within themselves and within their peers and that kind of fear. It is with the outside world and all of that that is that worrying bit.
So a question to David and Kat then, in your time in secondary schools, how did you see things change over the years? And as part of that, I mean, I've realized neither of you work in secondary schools anymore, but did you see any of these issues with supposed issues with the trans community before you left?
Not necessarily the trans community, but this probably going back 10 years, this use of the word gay to mean anything bad or derogatory, that was quite common amongst the kids. Oh, that's so gay. But I do recall a number of occasions where students were correcting other students for using that term towards the end of my teaching career. So there was recognition there that it was A, being used incorrectly, and B, a derogatory thing that they shouldn't be doing from their side. And the one thing I made a note on with the questions was when I started teaching, and we're going back 20 years now, there were LGBT clubs for students. But it was all very covert in terms of there would be a poster on the corridor that would say, go and speak to this teacher in this room if you're interested. Now, when I'm doing, as a building surveyor, surveys in schools, they've got, notice boards and corridors full of LGBT stuff, clubs, societies, people who have worked in industry, all industries, who identify as LGBT as being kind of role models, really. And it was never as kind of open as that when I was teaching. So even in the space of that kind of 20 years, from what I've seen in schools that I'm surveying now, there's certainly a lot more awareness of it and people are a lot more open with it.
I would agree with that as well. So I think our teaching careers might have intersected at some point. So I started teaching in 2013, and at that time it was gay as an insult was the most common thing. And I was like, oh, don't want to do that. That's so gay. And you would speak to the pupil and say, like, no, you can't say that. You're alluding to gay being a bad thing, and it's not. And you're right, that became less and less and less. What obviously my situation's a little different. I'm based in Scotland. So I think it was in 2020, 2021, Scotland announced that they were going to have an LGBT inclusive education and they were going to phase that in. Now, I don't know how much of that's being phased in because even though I left teaching this year, it still wasn't sort of in place. But the main thing, are things getting better? Yes and no, because there's so much misinformation online, specifically about trans people, and a lot of fear mongering when there doesn't need to be. The pupils will read anything online and take it as gospel, and they'll say, "Oh, well, I saw a TikTok that said this, so it's automatically fact." And the people who are delivering these LGBT lessons aren't necessarily the ones who are most qualified to do so. They tend to be maybe guidance teachers up in Scotland or years ahead in England who have been in the post forever. And new ideas are scary. So things are better than they were. Certainly pupils are a lot more comfortable calling each other out if someone has said something that they're not meant to. But those people who will always claim ignorance on ideas have got more ammunition now because of how easy it is to get misinformation. So it's some things are improving, some things are not. It's an interesting time.
Yeah, I think you're right in that it was generally shoehorned into a PSHE lesson or a session that the form tutor delivered, and only because Ofsted said it had to be done once a term or something for half an hour, and then you move on to everything else. The curriculum is so jam-packed with academic things, academic content, that it's just one of a number of things that they have to do, but they just pay lip service to it. It's not kind of intrinsic within the curriculum.
It's interesting. I've done a few different things. I remember there was one school I went to and I was told, like, oh, the LGBT young people, they're getting bullied. But it was a really interesting thing because at the end of the assembly that I did, like the group came running down, they came down to talk to me and they were all wearing rainbow pins. And of course, when I was at school, that wouldn't have happened. So yes, they're getting bullied, but they're still identifying themselves. This was a few years ago. So it's sort of this weird improvement. But of course, I mean, I went, while I was at school and then my first degree as well. And, that was still under Section 28 when you couldn't really talk about being LGBT. And I guess, David, when you started teaching, it was just at the end of that because that was 20 years ago.
That's right, yeah.
So, we were still getting over that. I love it when I'm in schools and I say, like, it's illegal to do this when I was in school, But also, I think it's good to start getting that real visibility, I mean, I'm starting to think that when it comes to schools and talks and stuff like that, and even visibility on TV, I'd rather see people of different diversities doing their jobs rather than talking about being diverse. I'd rather, it's so much better instead of bringing in a scientist to talk about being black, let's talk about being a scientist and they happen to be black or whatever it is. And that's the one big thing, and it's the reason that I'm quite helpful, because it was quite easy. Things were improving for LGBT people before Section 28, and that scared certain groups. We can't put that now. We have the internet, so young people are seeing people. They're seeing that visibility. I never saw trans people growing up, but now they're seeing it all over the place. And so that visibility, we can't put that visibility back in the bottle, and that's it's a good thing. It's however the government changes, and it's really interesting. I think someone was mentioning something, another little story. I run a youth group for LGBT young people, and one of the young people, it's sad and it's horrific, but it's interesting. They were saying, like, they have a bully and this person is bullying them, but their bully will always correct their pronouns when other people misgender them. And It's a weird sort of like, well, I feel good and bad at the same time, I mean, it's generally
that's interesting though. I mean, it shows how times have changed.
That was 2 months ago that young person said that, and I'm like, I don't know what to make of this, Yeah.
Interesting. So what barriers are there still for LGBTQ plus people in STEM related education in particular? We talked about some barriers and some challenges that you've had as educators. What challenges are there for students from secondary school age all the way up to university age? Avery, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I think we've alluded to bits of the things. Is that there is still more about these kind of like role models has always been a big thing, and that kind of imposter syndrome. I've always a big thing about imposter syndrome affects us a lot, especially in fields like STEM, because STEM is hard, right? Like we do a lot of like it's actually quite hard to do things like science and engineering. And so when you look around and you see people that are not like you, it really adds to that. And there is bits of this as well about we are starting to see more of those role models and they can find this stuff online, but can they see that in their peers? Can they see that in their teaching? It's okay to have somebody kind of brought in occasionally or cite that sites out. But embedding things in the curriculum, using those examples, thinking about if those examples are actually embedding those things is just still some of those things we need to, I think, do more of. And just making it be part of that kind of like norm that we do think about LGBT people as being part of that and bringing their experiences in that. And some of these things sadly also aren't STEM specific, which is part of the thing as I move slowly away, is it's also quite hard because we talk a bit about how we're going to do it for STEM students, which do have some of the new things of historic things, but also some of these are societal issues. Sometimes we treat some of these issues, and I've heard other STEM folks talk about it. They're not always specific to STEM folks issues that we're talking about. This is society issues, and how do we, as scientists and educators, be part of that, solving these kind of issues? Like we are problem solvers. How do we be part of solving these problems for society as well? How are we working with those kind of more social scientists as part of this? How are we becoming part of that bigger community? And making the others see that this is still a barrier and this is still an issue, and that people can't be disentangled. Like we're all about the science, yeah, but who's doing the science? Who's thinking about these things? What experience are they bringing? Even in things like my favorite example comes from the field of maths, actually, that there's things, there is like the stable marriage problem, but who was going to name that if you can't legally get married? Who is going to name it that? And having them think about these considerations and how they do bring aspects of their personal lives to whatever they do. There is no separating a person from the science.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really interesting perspective. Kat, you're an Institute of Physics Girls into Physics and Engineering organizer. What's your take on this?
So, as I realized I didn't mention that at the start. So, I also work for the Institute of Physics, organizing Girls into Physics and Engineering events. And as part of that, we tried to bring in lots of different people into an area where girls will come along and sort of see the different physics and engineering that there is. Now, one of the things that over the last couple of years, since I've taken over the running, I'm trying to make sure that we include is that we have non-binary and trans pupils involved in that as well, to tie in into what is morally correct, and as part of the IOP's Limitless campaign as well. With I think Clara and what Avery said about role models is it's getting the role models in and promoting not the fact that they're LGBT. It's just this is what they do, how amazing this is. Oh, by the way, they're married to a man or whatever it is. I think schools and educators were quite limited in time to really go into a lot of different things. And some people think that it should be irrelevant. It should be irrelevant that we're LGBT. It should be irrelevant that we're female. And yeah, you're right. It should be, but it's not. And until it's not relevant, I think I'm getting my double negatives wrong, but until that time comes, it's something that we actively have to promote as educators. And I think there's still a lot of barriers to that because there are some people that wrongly assume that, oh, equality is a thing, it's already happened. And I think there are quite a lot of old ways of thinking in education still that have that sort of bias behind it.
Mm.
And because we're out, we're almost seen as the role models when really all we want to do is do our jobs and and have an easy life, and have that for everyone else that are in our care. Yeah, I think role models are definitely the thing that we need more of. Going in a circle there, sorry.
No, absolutely fine. So David, you mentioned you were head of faculty for technologies at your school. What barriers did you see for LGBTQ plus students?
Yeah, I mean, STEM is quite a broad remit, science, technology, engineering and maths. But from my point of view, it was generally the boys who were taking, I mean, maths obviously compulsory, certainly design and technology, it was predominantly boys, 90% boys. And then typically, I mean, they put food technology under design and technology. Food technology was generally girls. And as you move out of education and into industry, as I am with WSP now, it's quite a macho kind of working environment. And it's just interesting from my point of view, and things that Poggy had said to me before I kind of made the transition into a different industry, that I will find that in teaching, there's a bit more kind of protection. There's a lot of female teachers, obviously, mainly it's females in teaching. But the interesting point I thought was how it transcends all age groups. So from and the question is, does this STEM is for boys? Does that start at high school, or does it primary school? Does it permeate down from the working environment? It kind of transcends the whole thing. So is it a bottom up thing or a top down thing? And how do we go about changing that? We did have in my secondary school, as they do in a lot, houses. And I worked in Stockport. They were named after famous Mancunians. And one of them was Alan Turing. And we had a themed day, which was based upon the achievements of Alan Turing. And it was a STEM themed day, and we had representatives from Arup and various other industries. But that, again, was just one day promoting STEM to every student in the school, which was great. But I don't ever remember Alan Turing's sexuality being covered at all. And I know the point that it should be about the work that the people have done, not necessarily their sexuality. But I don't, if you said to any of the kids in my school, was Alan Turing gay, unless they'd seen the film or knew from somewhere else, I don't think they would know. So I think it's important to signpost those things. But obviously, as we've said already, it's the achievements that are the main thing, I think, really.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anything else to add to that, Clara?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it's going back through the history books, being LGBT, and it's the same with sort of hidden disabilities or non-visible disabilities. You know, you can't go back through the history books and be like, oh, this person, you know, because in the most case when it comes to LGBT, it's speculation, you know, unless they were open. Alan Turing is one of the few cases where, you know, it was a court case, and it's usually the tragic one. So you don't have those historical role models that Kat was talking about. You can't really pull them out. And so that's why, you know, there are a few. And it's interesting that, you know, I think many of us will be, if you're an LGBT STEM person, you probably have 15 different hats. You know, I collect titles like I collect Pokemon at the moment. It's because it's like, you know, it's like we want to be here and we want to be there and want to be everywhere. But it's, yeah, so that's kind of interesting, not sort of overdoing it, but it is difficult because we can't rely on the history books to pull out those role models. And yeah, it's difficult. It's a difficult one, but I think we're moving towards it. It's like I say, we don't want to be pushing things on other people. What I will say, one of the difficulties right now as well is, you know, this idea that it's acceptable to be anti-woke, you know, against equality and diversity. The Secretary of State for the UK, you know, literally called out a couple of people who were on a panel a few months ago and slandered them basically to the point that they were, you know, the Secretary of State was actually found guilty of slander, and thus the government spending our money paid them, you know, because they had to. And it's really interesting how, you know, the Secretary of State is saying, you know, let's get the equality and diversity out of out of scent. It's nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter. What was really interesting about that was that those comments were made very publicly, and 3 days later I was in Westminster talking about being LGBT and how we've got to support our LGBT scientists. So, you know, it's like that's the civil service versus the government, but there's definitely an acceptability, and that's why, I mean, people in my university are very willing to be very openly anti-LGBT or to call out trans people or whatever it is. There's an acceptability right now, which is led from the government, and I don't think that the current government's necessarily going to change that anytime soon. So it's kind of interesting. I think
It's an
that's the
interesting
biggest
point, and
challenge.
I think it feeds back into the point David made about whether this is bottom or top down. I mean,
Yeah,
schools
yeah.
will take, to a certain degree, I would imagine schools will take their lead from industry, and if it's
Mhm.
acceptable in industry to get rid of DEI, then will schools follow?
Exactly. I mean, my take on that, it is top down, because the kids are, you know, they're not automatically attuned to think that, they're taught that. And the schools just kind of go with that. I mean, we didn't strictly have streaming at GCSE, but we had coloured pathways, and a lot of it was based on ability in terms of you're quite intelligent, you're not taking design and technology, for example. You're very intelligent, so you're taking languages. It's that kind of stigma, isn't it?
Mhm. Absolutely. And it's frustrating. I remember when I was at school, I wanted to do the three sciences. But because I was quite good at school, they were like, oh no, you have to do a language as well. So I dropped biology at standard grade, which is essentially GCSE. But Adam was allowed to take all three. But I couldn't. Um, and then even and then being an educator, it's definitely top down because I remember a pupil had come out as trans, so I was using their preferred name and their pronouns, and we got a message from the guidance teacher saying, so and so's parents have asked that you don't use that name or those pronouns. And it was like, well, this isn't a child protection issue, so I don't actually have to listen to that at all. I'm going to do what's right for the pupil and call them what they want to be called. But when speaking in the staff room about this, and I sort of said, well, it's not a child protection issue. One of the teachers said, oh, but you know, if it was one of my kids, then I would want to know what they were getting called by teachers. And it's so frustrating when it's educated people that are just choosing to not be educated about it. And because it is so rife for people to be anti-woke and so on, it's just we're doing our kids a disservice with those sort of attitudes. And it's not all doom and gloom. I realize that I've been very negative. It's not. There are some wonderful people and wonderful things that are happening. But yeah, it's people
It's
will
interesting to
learn
think
from
how,
what's there.
and realizing that you're in Scotland, so this may not apply in Scotland. I'm not
Mhm.
100% sure. And David's been out of teaching for 3 years, but the UK government's draft trans guidance for schools, I think it's just England. I don't think that's Scotland, but I wonder how that potentially would have changed that situation had that guidance been in place at the time.
I do wonder. I think it's different here.
Yeah.
I think because education is a devolved
Mhm.
system, so I think
Avery and
it's
Clara, what are
different.
your takes on the draft guidance that was published? I think it was December of last year.
It was bad. I mean, it was very difficult to read because I work with so many educators and so many teachers and head teachers. And it goes against the core principles of supporting the student, getting the best out of the student. It was literally it was very difficult reading, and I know that some of the young people in my youth group, you know, they were horrified by it, and unfortunately we've not got rid of homophobia and transphobia. It's amazing how often we hear parents say, oh, I just want the best for my child, but Also, there's an awful lot of young homeless people because they came out as LGBT. So, you know, schools need to be a safe space in some cases because for protection. And what these things were basically saying was, well, if you think your child's trans, then you need to out them and potentially gay as well. And that can put them in more danger, in my opinion. It should be about protecting and getting the most out of the young people. It's a very difficult situation, and it opened up a whole can of worms. I mean, it called into question the whole Gillick competency as well, and then that brings into question a whole bunch of stuff, other choices that young people are making, and very difficult, very, very tricky.
Yeah, I would echo that. My partner is a teacher, a maths teacher in a local school in Birmingham. So having these kind of discussions as well, especially since she works at one of the schools that had the protests that were from the last
Oh,
few
wow.
years. We still have the remnants of that going around in Birmingham. We still do have people who bring up those protests, the fact there's LGBT teachers, all of that kind of things as well. And it's horrible to see it echoed here as well. Working with an organization like OSTEM, which is so US based, I've already seen some of these things come through. I see it coming through in Florida, I see it coming through in Texas. And then when my friends are like, oh, but you're doing okay in the UK, right? And I'm like, no, here's this report, here's the CAS review, here are all of
Yeah.
these things as well. We are no better, even if you're seeing us like this. So it's really disheartening to see us go backwards in these things and what effect that has. And when I am having those conversations, when I'm talking to undergrads and being like, no, I don't have it, and it doesn't reflect what I see in my day-to-day life with it in general. Like the general people that I talk to, at least to my face, are very, very reasonable about it. It's but then when I see these policies and when I see people online, it doesn't mesh with my reality, and that's really hard as well.
Thank you for that. We have some comments here. In research rather than education in universities, at the moment, UK research and innovation funders are actively supporting DEI initiatives. I kept expecting it to be rolled back, but I haven't seen any sign yet. The UK government can only set expectations for education in England, but it does put pressure on the Scottish government and Welsh governments to respond. Otherwise, the English position becomes the only position. There's some interesting points there. Combining and for anybody else who's attending the event, you can post questions in the Q&A at the bottom. So combining a couple of questions for the panelists. What programs or policies or support systems have you seen that have been beneficial in overcoming some of the problems that we've talked about today? And what advice would you give to LGBTQ plus students, educators, academics to help foster a more inclusive educational environment?
I come back in again, sorry,
Sure.
I've just spoken, but one of my things is that kind of is LGBT mentoring and support groups has been really helpful for me. It comes a bit back to that role model things that I mentioned before, but the kind of near peer aspect. It's really good when you do have those role models that are kind of like further along, but sometimes you just want to see that next step, right? You are an undergrad and you want to see somebody doing a postgrad. You are a secondary school student, you want to see that you can get to an undergrad. Sometimes it's really hard to visualize those next steps, and so just seeing that kind of aspect. And those kind of support network is honestly what got me through my degree. I wouldn't have even made it through without things like OSTEM, because having that group of just queer friends who are just there, also struggling with their kind of STEM degrees and having that outside perspective really, really helped. And that mentoring aspect as well. I've got multiple mentors. Some were in engineering, some are in my current career path, but that kind of LGBT person who is just like, yes, it can suck, but here are the things you could do. And that's a lot of what I offer as well. Like it doesn't have to be in your field, just another LGBT person to be like, what are the next steps? What's going on? Am I seeing these kind of things is really helpful. And just creating that community aspect. And that would be my advice to any student or any person as well. Find your community and hold on to them because those are what keep you going.
Absolutely. It's such a big part of why
Yeah.
Fiona and I are part of Inter Engineering as well, I would say.
That's literally word for word what my advice for pupils has been in the past and would still be now. It's one, be you, always be you, because you being you is the best version. And second is find your community. It doesn't necessarily have to be within the school for it to be worthwhile. find who those people are and hold on to them for dear life, because they are a lifesaver. Quite often. To the straight educators, be better allies would be the main bit of advice. Banter is not banter if it is affecting someone. I've heard so many like, oh, it's just banter, miss. It's like, no, it's not banter to them. It might be for you, but not for them. So it's, yeah, be better allies, find your community.
Yeah, one of the key phrases they had kind of key phrases on the corridors, inspirational phrases, and one of them in my school was "Be yourself because everyone else is taken." I thought that was quite interesting. How well it hit home with the kids, I don't know. But I agree entirely with the mentoring. One thing we found quite successful at our school was peer mentoring. So you may have a year 11 student who was helping a year 7 who struggled with bullying or whatever it might be, whatever the issue might be. I think there would probably be some year 11 students who'd be quite willing to do that. But yeah, same again. Be open, be honest, be upfront, really.
Yeah, I think it's good if you're in a position where you can be open, but obviously you have to sort of consider the situation, you know, and think about that. One thing that's really important and one thing that I like to do, because it's a tricky time, but there's always more work to do. There's always stuff that's wrong. There's always stuff that we need to sort out. And sometimes we're going back a little bit, but also there is a lot of positives. And I really want people to remember to think about the positives, think about the progress that has been made, because there has. I mean, it is, even though it feels like we're sliding back, it's better than when I came out 10 years ago, better than when I was at school. And so it's really important to reflect, you know, on our successes and our things. And the truth is, my life would have been easier if I'd have not had any hate and if I'd been able to come out earlier. But my life has been freaking awesome, you know, and I met so many amazing people. I'm on the panel with so many amazing people right now. And, you know, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't lived the life I'd led. So, you know, I like to keep on thinking like, well, yeah, things aren't perfect, but you know, I'm really glad for what we do have. And yeah, doesn't mean that we can't stop pushing for change, but we do have to realize the progress we've made and some of the positives that we have had as a result. So I know it's always difficult, but I try and be cheesy a little bit in that regard.
I love that. That's such a good message, because you're right. Like, it feels like we're going backwards, but it's the same with every sort of thing that happens before the next progressive step is always taken, because people are scared. So things are better now than they have been. 100%.
Fiona, do you have any questions?
No questions. Just been having a lot of conversations today with some friends around stereotypes, presumptions, prejudices in heavy engineering fields, and it's reflective of this around educators needing to catch their own privileges, perhaps, and ensure that they're not transferred on to the next generation, and that equal opportunity is given equitably, in that presumptions around what's appropriate for boys and girls and what their interests are and how early that's integrated into their mindset around what they might actually want to be doing, around what people presume. So yeah, I know, just echoing all of that, and yeah, it's keeping positive, and ensuring we try and share as many best role models as possible. But yeah, I've loved everyone's contributions. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I don't think we have any other questions from the audience, but I would like to thank all 4 of our speakers for joining. It's been really, really informative. I've really enjoyed this one.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, same.
No
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Can I just make one final note?
Absolutely.
I think with some students, certainly in secondary school, there is a clarification of what the term engineering actually means. It isn't, you know, some students assume it's the guy who comes around to mend your washing machine, or it's just about laying railway tracks, and it's such a massive sphere. And I think as soon as you say engineering to some students, it's an instant turn off. That's not for me. And the other point I'd like to make is how important work experience is for every single student in every single school. And in the last few years that I was teaching, it was cut back, so there was no work experience at all. But that is the one opportunity that kids get, you know, 14, 15, to be in the real world, away from the bubble of school, and they get to meet real people. And I think that, I look back on my work experience, I worked in a bank at the age of 14, 15, but I still look back on that as being a really, really good rounding part of my education, really.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about the engineering as well, because I did joke I was a recovering engineer, but I still feel like an engineer. I'm just solving different problems in my role now. I'm just solving people problems rather than maybe more technical problems, but I still think that doesn't leave you as well. Like, no matter what, you are still an engineer at heart, and everyone can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with that point. I think when you see, and there are discussions about how other countries may be sort of snobbish in how they protect the word engineer, but I think there is a perception, certainly in this country, that you perhaps don't get in other countries as to what an engineer is. And from your experience, David, in school, certainly in the experience that I had in my school, which was also in South Manchester, I would never have taken a DT or any subjects like that because of the people who also would have taken that subject. I was put off by those people, and I think that, at least for me, and perhaps for other people, is why people may be put off engineering, because of the perceived culture that there is within the industry. That's hopefully what interengineering and other networks like us are.
It comes back into pathways as well, doesn't it? And not closing off pathways. For example, my route into engineering was a bit curvy because I didn't exactly want to take STEM subjects at school, but I'm still an engineer now. But that prohibits me from getting certain chartership options because my undergrad doesn't necessarily fit with my master's, which is accredited. And now the fact that I've got 10 years engineering experience, so it all links back into this, like,
absolutely. And
process around
ironically,
options
the answer is education.
Yeah.
Yeah,
People
education
think
as to
it's
what
a long
engineering
way off
is.
and it doesn't impact the rest of your career, but ultimately the decisions you do make,
Sure.
maybe not your grades, but subjects and things can have an impact if people are too narrow-minded in their conceptions of what engineers do and are going forward.
Absolutely. We're over time now, so I'm going to bring it to a close. But thank you again for everybody on the panel who's joined us today. We have one of these every month. We've had one every month since February, so feel free to join again next month.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.